So here we are. We've got another month, another edition of Beyond the Bias with Alex Reid, and we've had a couple of good guests on so far, and I've got a third one with Mr. John McBeth. So before we get started about anything, how are you feeling, John? What's your day been like so far?
It's been rather hectic, actually, Alex. The alarm went off far too early. Then I'm preparing to do a funeral this afternoon, so that's final touches being done to that. And my wife's away, so I'm doing the sort of stuff that she normally does here. You know, she must do a lot. Can't believe it.
Sorry for asking.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, it's nice to have you on the podcast, John. And,
Thank you.
I was triggered. I was always going to have you on as a guest, but I noticed the other month, or you've been mentioning for a while, you've been talking about this book that you've been writing for some time, and I see now that it's been released, which is, I think, pretty cool, and you've had a good response from what I've seen. So I thought I'd like to talk about the book today for a little bit, and I suppose any conversation about a book should start at why you wrote the book. So if you could talk us through that to begin with, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Well, it really did start with one of our sons saying to me, look, I'd like to record some material from you, Dad, because a lot of stuff I don't know what you've done, and it'd be nice for posterity's sake. And so we chatted for about an hour one day, and he started to, a lot of memories started to emerge. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So he never followed up on that. But I was chatting with a friend, Joseph Romanus, who's been a well-known sports writer and book editor and so on, publisher. And he once said to me about 6 years ago over coffee, he said, you've got a book on you, mate. Why don't you sit down and write one? But he said, just be aware, I won't keep on at you. I won't say, how's it going? If you're going to write a book, it's entirely up to you. So self-discipline came into it. And I recognized quite early in this piece that it was a daunting prospect to sit down and write a book on my own. So that's where it started about 6 years ago. And I wrote one chapter, and then I just put it down, and I went back and read that again until I got absolutely sick of that chapter, thinking, what's next? And it did take a long time. And I put it away for months on end, and then came back. And eventually with COVID, that gave me a bit more time. And I also requested 3 friends to write a piece for me, and theirs arrived within weeks. And so all of a sudden I realized that, I'm committed now. I've got their inserts. I must finish this book. So by February of this year, I pretty much finished it. And it's taken this long to get it through the editing process and get it printed and all that sort of thing, Alex. So a long drawn out process, and as you'd expect, a long drawn out answer to your question.
Fair enough. It was a good answer. I was enjoying listening to it. So when you write it, did your typing speed improve over the last 5 years, John? Because it must be.
No.
You've typed it.
No.
Not at all?
No. Still the forefinger on each hand, looking down at the keys. And I've been typing for, 50 years, but I've never really become a touch typist. If you ask me where is Q on, or I know where Q is, but if you would ask me where G is on a keyboard, I would have no idea, but I could find it when I'm typing. You know the story. So no, it didn't improve much. My accuracy didn't improve either. And my reading ability, I thought I was very good at picking up mistakes in people's writing, and I probably am, except when it came to mine. I read and reread and reread, and then handed it over to Joseph, who read and reread and edited, and I thought, well, that's pretty good. The two of us, we're clued up, we're quite smart, we'll have picked up every mistake. And then I took it down, I had a proof copy, and I took it down to Joseph to show him, and he said, oh, that looks really good, mate, looking at the cover and so on. On the train on the way back, I just browsed through the introduction and that, and I found 2 more mistakes there. So I took it to a 91-year-old who'd been a sub-editor in magazines, newspapers for years, and he said, I'll have a look at it for you, mate. And he must have found 45 errors. And even looking at it now, Alex, once it's been published, I opened up a page and I thought, oh, there's a mistake. How come none of us picked that up? So, yeah. So neither my typing nor my editing skills improved.
Okay, so I suppose if your typing skills haven't improved after writing a book, John, I think that ship's probably sailed.
Yeah, I think so.
To be fair.
Got my techo skills.
We're fine. Happy days. So you've written a book. It's taken a few years in the making. It's out and about now. And before we get into what's in the book, remind me, what did you decide to call it in the end? What's the name of this book, John?
Well, it's called It's Over. And I had some well-meaning friends who gave me some other titles, such as A Great Face for Radio and, The Best Job in the World and all that sort of stuff. But I once, and I didn't settle on the title until very late in the piece, and it was pretty much a reflection on doing commentaries, particularly my rugby days where someone would kick a goal and you'd say, it's over, or the final whistle would sound or hooter sound in some event and you'd say, it's over. And then I thought, when I pulled out of the Tokyo Olympics and the Beijing Winter Olympics recently, I thought, well, maybe that's it. My career as a commentator at those major events is over. So I thought, there it goes. It's over. A bit of a significant couple of words.
Absolutely. And I think a good name, better than A Face for Radio, which I've been told that a few times myself, so we'll just leave that one. So I'd like to talk a bit about what's in the book, John, and obviously, bowls has been intertwined, so we'll get there as we go through this chat. But the book, so what's the start? What's in your first couple of chapters? How does it start? What's the beginnings of the book of John McBeth?
Well, the book itself, I didn't want to do a chronological book because that would take me forever. So I've done the first chapter really is about how I became a rugby commentator, and that takes us back to Dunedin in 1978, the process that was involved, and it was pretty much people grasping at straws and saying, okay, John, look, we've got no one else, we'd like you to have a go at it. And then I take people back to my early days, my birth in Kurau, through my schooling and growing up in Timaru, my sport involvement in that region, marriage, family, and then through to transfer to Dunedin, where I did the commentaries at Carisbrook, onto Napier, down to Wellington, which I didn't want to shift to, a place I was wanting to avoid, but ended up going there, giving it 5 years and stayed there, through to some of the highlights of my 8 Olympic Games and 9 Commonwealth Games and 4 America's Cups and all the Rugby World Cups. This one will be the first one I've missed in some guise or other, and Winter Olympics and lots of firsts that I've been involved in. So it is all over the place as it sounds as I talk to you now. But rather than going through saying, I went to Argentina in 1986 and this is what happened there, and then in 1987 this happened, or I just said, right, Argentina, here's my experiences within Argentina. So it becomes a whole chapter on many visits to Argentina as an example. So it took me a while, Alex, to settle into that sort of format, and I think it's worked, although some people might find it a bit difficult to end up, one chapter in 2020, and then I'm going back the next chapter to 1984 or something, but they'll soon get used to it.
No, it's good. Did you find you remembered stuff that you'd forgotten as you were going through the process of writing this book?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Oh, gosh. And that's sometimes why it takes so long, because you're constantly remembering things or being reminded of things. I kept diaries, but only basic diaries from about late 80s, and I kept those, but it was mainly, Thursday the 17th of June, flying to Dunedin 8:05 or something like that. And occasionally I'd write in little notes about what might have happened. I certainly diarised significant stuff, but not as detailed as I wish I had. So that helped, but constantly I was going back, either Googling events or going back through my sports library, asking my family to remind me of what had happened. I didn't seek much advice from outside. I didn't ask other people what they thought about something that might have happened. I just said, this is my memories, my book, and some of the things I've written from 40 years ago, people might have a different recall of, but that's how it went. So, it took a long time. And writing a book, the writing part of it is not so bad. It's the sort of researching and preparation and then, working out what's important and what's not. Yeah. So I'd never done it before. I'm a radio trained journalist, and in radio, you were the main ingredient of radio was to hit the point early and make it short. So, adding and embellishing stuff was a bit foreign to me. So that was a bit of a task.
Did you find when you were writing the book, how do you put it, like the voice that you have when you're writing? Did you already have sort of a tone that you wanted to take with the book, or did that develop as you were going through? Thought, here's the tone, like a conversation or whatever. How did that come about?
That was interesting. I sent a couple of chapters to a friend who'd written a book, and he came back and he said, when I was writing mine, the publisher said we'd really like a few more quotes, people's quotes, rather than just being your memories. He said, and even if you make some up, it doesn't matter. And so the first chapter, in fact, it opens with a quote, and it's from Dunedin. And I've got the book. What are you going to do? Time's running out, Bill. So a comment from the manager in Dunedin. So I started with that, and I carried on with quotes all the way through, which really made it a heck of a lot more interesting to write, and also I think for people to read. So that helped a lot, and pretty much all my quotes are accurate, or as accurate as I remember, but it does enhance the process and I think the final product.
Absolutely. And I suppose you mentioned your rugby commentary earlier on, and you're not a small name when it comes to rugby commentary. So I think viewers or listeners will be interested. Can you talk us through your start in the rugby commentary business or game, or whatever you want to call it?
Sure.
And you said it was like people grasping at straws. Can you give us an anecdote about your first game of rugby commentary, or the first time you were sort of involved in that, and then maybe how it developed from there?
Well, I started doing a bit of part-time sports broadcasting in Timaru at the radio station near 3XC. I was in the music side of things initially, so selecting records to go onto programs. Each station in those days had a little team of programmers, and I was one in Timaru. But I was injured playing rugby, and then I was listening at home, wondering how was my Celtic rugby team getting on. They were playing in Twizel. There were no cell phones, of course, in those days, no internet or any of that sort of thing. So we were totally reliant on a local sports reporter at 6:30 on a Saturday to give us the results of the day's play of all sports. So I went to my boss there and said, "What's that? I come in and ring around the grounds and just put progress scores over live on a Saturday afternoon." So that was the start of it. Eventually, I was transferred to, or applied for, a job in Dunedin, still doing music, but also doing part-time and much more full Saturdays and Sundays doing sports reporting. And then Ian Galloway was the famous commentator in Dunedin, both in cricket and rugby. And he was just the second commentator that ever had at Carisbrook, so long careers for both he and his predecessor. He retired, and we thought, there were plenty of people who showed potential around the area that we thought would have no trouble in finding a replacement for Ian Galloway. And Bill Francis, my boss there, we were charged with auditioning people. We called for auditions, we had them in, we recorded them, and we'd hit sort of despair situation. So that's where that opening line in my book comes from. Where are we at? What's happening, Bill? And that was the manager of 4ZB saying, who's going to replace Ian Galloway? And we discussed it with him and said, look, we've tried all these people. Anyway, eventually, as I say, I braved up and said, what say I have a go? I'd like to have a go at it. So as I say, it wasn't quite desperation. I think they knew that I had the potential, but I'd never done a full-on commentary. I'd done lots of reports, but not a commentary. So they gave me this, not an audition, but they gave me the first match of the season, which was played on an absolutely brilliant sunny day in Dunedin. Carisbrook was full. It was 2 invitational teams featuring international players. And I rocked, Alex. I was so nervous, and I won't go into that. But when I opened my mouth and started, I just felt fantastic. And it went really well, and the game was fantastic, lots of action, and the sun was shining and the crowd was roaring. And I went back to work afterwards, and everyone congratulated me and said that was great. And the next week the boss said, "You've got the job." So that's how it started, and there were lots of ups and downs. And the first down was the following week when I had to do a club match at Carisbrook, and there were about 5 people there. It was raining, it was muddy, the score ended up 9-3, and I struggled. But it was a good lesson, Then I knew that it wasn't going to be all plain sailing.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, John. And the other question before we move on to more conversation, you started off in radio and then you moved into the world of television, obviously, or clearly. How different is that to the world of radio? Is there a difference? Like, what was the feelings there, and how did that happen?
I think if I'd known the difference, I wouldn't have gone from radio to television, honestly. I was very naive. Because I was commentating at the big matches that people like Keith Quinn and Grant Nisbet were commentating, I never heard them. I didn't take any notice of television commentary. And so when I arrived, I wasn't prepared for it, and I wasn't really, to be fair, given much training within TVNZ. So it took a while for me to get rid of my radio habits, and just to elucidate on that a little bit, in radio, people can't see what's happening, so you become their television monitor, you're their television set in their head, and you describe things vastly differently than if you're on television. And for example, at Carisbrook, I would talk about, the railway end of Carisbrook. That's away to my left. I'm sitting on the grandstand side of the field. On the far side is the embankment where there's lots of scarfies down on my right, on the far right of me. And I'd talk about play being, just to my right on the 22, so that people could get a picture of it. Whereas television is not like that, because all that description is there for the viewer to see. So it took me a long time to A, reduce my words, and B, to speak only enhancing the pictures, so not, stating the obvious. It took a long time, a good season for me to really get to grips with that. But I felt once I did, I became quite a competent television commentator. Eventually, though, it was, into the role of sideline commentator, which I loved. Working with Keith, for example, I just loved that, being able to watch closely areas of play off the ball to see what people were getting up to, and then alert the director to various things and say, just keep an eye on this, put a shot on this person here, just watch what he's doing, all that sort of stuff. So to try and just add to the coverage and to the viewers' enjoyment of a match, and make them more aware of some stuff that was going on. So there was that, and then also the fronting on television became a forte for me, and I suppose particularly with America's Cup commentary, which was a vastly different experience. Gosh, totally different. I went to San Diego. I'm not letting you ask any questions, Alex.
No, I was going to say, well, that's a brilliant segue. I ask you about the America's Cup, so go.
Oh, good. Well, I was asked to, TVNZ and I thought they were going to get rid of me, really, because I'd had some major detractors among the decision makers at TVNZ. But eventually I was asked to go to San Diego, pretty much by default, but I just loved it and I thrived in it, and I thought to myself, this is a great opportunity for me to show these buggers that are making the decisions that I'm worth hanging on to. Yeah. And so off I went and fronted for 6 months in San Diego, and I fronted hundreds of hours of live television coverage back to New Zealand when not Team New Zealand then, but the New Zealand under Peter Blake and Russell Coutts and so on won the America's Cup. And much of it, in fact, all of it was done without the aid of autocue. So it was all just handwritten notes, totally ad-libbing, requiring expertise alongside me in the form of ex-sailors or current sailors who were available to help, thinking of the people in New Zealand, and I often referred to my parents who knew nothing about sailing, and I would ask questions that I thought would help them and others like them to understand sailing and what was happening in the America's Cup and the terminology and why they're doing various things and how to spot wind on the water and all that sort of thing. So because a lot of people watching had no idea, and it became an educational commentary and broadcast or telecast, as well as making sure that those who were into yachting didn't feel as though we were dumbing it down. So yeah, so that sort of saved my career really within TVNZ, and I just loved it. I loved the America's Cup, and I did 4 of them and was then instrumental in coaching some of the commentators, Americans, for the San Francisco deal. But then I think, again, going back to the title of my book, it's over. Very enjoyable.
Oh, fantastic. That's interesting. And did you find, I mean, obviously it's quite different to commentating a rugby match to it is commentating yachting. When it comes to your commentary style, have you gone through figuring it out yourself, or do they provide coaching? Like, how does it work when it comes to, and you go, here's a sport you're commentating, John, go for it?
That's pretty much it. I've done, I don't think I've outlined in my book the dozens of various sports that I've commentated at various events. For example, I was at the Southeast Asian Games in Guangzhou, China, and I just working from a studio, and one morning the director or producer said to me, "We want you to do fencing today." So fencing, I knew that there were the various categories, épée and so on, but I thought, well, this is interesting. So I asked others around, none of them had done fencing, and all just laughed and said, "Please, you pulled that one, mate." So it was just then a matter of asking people. Things like Google and YouTube and that have become so important as a tool for commentators. Getting landed with that meant that I could only go to YouTube, for example, pull up Olympic fencing finals and listen to what they were saying, and just taking notes all the way through it, and then going in. You wouldn't say that's 100% prepared, would you? And as I've said to people, preparation is the key to a good commentary, but you can get away with it because in television too, that's when paucity of words is helpful. If you're not too sure what to say, don't say it. So that helping, yes. And going back to your question, no guidance at all, but you go out and seek information, and that was the case with the America's Cup. I knew that the big thing up the middle was the mast and the pointy end was the bow, and that was about it. But my research and that made me well prepared for the historical side of things, and then working with the likes of Peter Lester, PJ Montgomery, of course, who was out there commentating on it all, the main commentator, and others like Glenn Sowry, all experts. They must have got sick of me. I just kept asking. So that's the best you can do is, prepare as best you can. And these days, it's much easier than it was when I started.
Absolutely. Going back to the America's Cup conversation, and you spent 6 months over there. When you came back to New Zealand, was there any? Do people go, I've seen you fronting the coverage? Was there any sort of reaction from New Zealanders when you came back after having doing such a long stint with something that everyone was watching?
It was amazing how, within radio, you're anonymous, in general. And that was one of the reasons I took a long time to make my decision to accept the television offer. So all of a sudden you become a bit of public property and people recognize you and want to stop and talk. And, I've never had a hassle with that at all. You're sometimes subject to abuse as well, which, was a little bit harder to take. Yeah. But certainly the America's Cup was massive. And then, we came back from San Diego and I was involved, like a lot of the TVNZ people, involved in the parades and so on, because we'd been the face of, we'd brought it to New Zealand. We were the ones who, were the messenger really. And we felt very much a part of the whole campaign. So yes, things changed a fair bit for me after that, and earlier involvement with television. I'd done a rugby program called Boots and All when I was still a radio commentator, but that was controversial on peak hour on TVNZ. There was no Sky, of course, so people were only watching, a couple of channels. So if they wanted to watch on a Monday night at 7:30 or whatever it was, the majority of them were watching TV1. So that was, my first sort of break from being anonymous, and introduced me to the weird world of television. So long answer again, Alex, but that's America's Cup did change things for me too.
Absolutely. I suppose because the America's Cup itself changed, of course, over the years, and it seems to be getting ever more dramatic in how it changed. How did you feel about that when you went from like one campaign to another with the changes in the boats and the way it was run? How'd that feel as someone who'd done so much research the first time round when we won it in 1990, whenever that was? What was it like to then be confronted with something quite different?
Well, I was absolutely shocked. I mean, America's Cup is a weird beast. So 1995, when they won it and brought it back to New Zealand, it was 5 years before they defended it, and I kept saying, that people have lost interest. All those new fans that they'd got they were switching off, so they had to win them back again. Unfortunately, it was in Auckland, so 2000 was great. It was the old style. 2003 was a disaster for New Zealand when they lost it with things. We remember the mask snapping and all that sort of thing, and then we went off to Valencia. So Valencia was my last full involvement, and that was still the old style, Alex, and there was some remarkable racing off the coast of Spain. So then, with the new owners, the new holders of the Kapalingi, they decided to change things dramatically into what we see now. It's morphed into one of the most sensational and terrifying races in sailing, I think, into this new setup. And honestly, I'd be struggling with it because it is all about tactics, and it is over so very, very quickly that I think you need to be an absolute expert in the sport to be able to commentate on this. And that's what's happening. We've taken in, the likes. I mentioned Peter Lester earlier. He's one of the world-renowned commentator now, and it's because of his sailing skills and knowledge, because those races are pretty quick, aren't they? And right inshore, so people can see them. It's a vastly different beast to what it was when New Zealand first won this in 1995.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. All I remember is the year we didn't win when they went to the faster boats. And all of New Zealand was sitting there watching the race.
Yes.
We were a little bit too slow because we'd won 6 or 7 in a row, and the whole country went, we've won, it's fine.
I know.
Oh, the pain.
It was really painful, and I felt for them because they're all such good blokes, and they've done everything right. And then that's sport, though, isn't it? You can win everything until it really matters.
Yeah. Fantastic stuff. Okay, well, we've talked rugby and America's Cup and fencing, but I suppose, seeing as Beyond the Bias, which is a bowls reference, we may as well talk a little bit about lawn bowls and you, John. So where did that start? What was your first interaction?
Well, I'll go back to that, if I can find it quickly, chapter, what is it? Here I am, I'm saying...
you only wrote the book.
Yes, I know. It's entitled, Chapter 20, A Short Career as a Singer. And I know your viewers or listeners have probably heard this before, but I say it's really about the 2008 World Bowls Championships, and I refer to the time when New Zealand had such a successful bowls title that time there, winning, Val Smith won the singles, and her and Joe Edwards won the pairs, and Lawson won 2 titles in the 4 and the pairs. So it was a great time in Christchurch. So I was, by accident, really ended up singing the national anthem for Val Smith's medal presentation, because the recorded national anthem suddenly throttled itself, and it was ruining the whole presentation because the music had stopped and people were starting to mumble and wondering what was happening. And I'd been doing the presentation, so I had the microphone in my hand. And as you know, when there's a microphone near me, I'm very difficult to shut up. So, but not in singing. So I picked it up and sang the national anthem. So that's the beginning of that story. And Val and I often have talked about it since. She talked about a few other things too. But then and then it goes on to, where I first picked up an interest in bowls or was introduced to bowls. And you kindly posted a photograph of me and 3 women at a tournament in New Plymouth in 1968. And that was my first look at bowls. So I was just a 18 or 19-year-old, I suppose, in New Plymouth, had just been transferred, went along and watched bowls. Then when I was in Dunedin and my family had moved down there, and our oldest son, we didn't know he was going to be a son at that stage, but he was, because he had no way of knowing in those days whether you were having a son or a daughter, and we didn't care anyway. He was due to be born on around about New Year, and I'd been designated the bowls reporter at the National Championships in Dunedin in 1975. So that was the first reporting I did, and I interviewed some of the great names of bowls. I think of the late Phil Scogland, for example, and Gordon Jolly, and those sorts of people who'd all been such a huge influence on New Zealand bowls at the time. And then I took bowls up when I got to Wellington, because I was working early shifts and the bowling club was just around the corner from me. So I had a few roll-ups there, used my junior years without playing much, which now annoys me. And then, but highlights were, Alex, that Grant Nisbet and I both started about the same time, and we played in the national pairs in Wellington as second-year bowlers or something, and it was fantastic. We got so much publicity for that, mainly for not winning a game. But and then it went on, to playing a lot, commentating a lot at the bowls in the Vancouver Island, at the Commonwealth Games, through to the World Championships that I've just mentioned, lots of Asia Pacifics, national championships, all sorts of things over the years, and I've thoroughly loved it. I really have enjoyed it, and now, of course, working with you in the Bowls New Zealand team, in this wonderful system you've got going, I can't believe how smoothly it operates. And then, as I say, I've had always people know of. Not many people listening won't be aware of the Raumati Bowling Club, because I've taken every opportunity to plug it, and I've spent 4 years as president there. So, my bowls involvement has got stronger and stronger, but it started many years ago, and I've never lost my enjoyment for it.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you talk about the 4 years as president at Raumati Bowling Club, which you've just completed. So that's, I suppose it's a term or whatever. Had you planned to be the president? And during fair enough. During the term, if you look back over your 4 years, what sticks out to you? Is there anything you're particularly proud of that happened in that 4 years, John?
I think the increase in numbers at our club really has been, very heartening. But also seeing the emergence of what we've got now, a very good women's team. That's nothing to do with me, really, but as a president, you bask in the reflected glory. And I think, too, that watching people get involved, people go to clubs and say, I just want to play bowls, but seeing people, when you shoulder tap them, so willing to help out, because as we all know, bowls is all about volunteers, club members helping. You might not be the best bowler around, but you like being there, you like being at the club, and you want to help. And I think that's been really, really impressive for me. We've done a lot there, Alex. Our sponsorship has grown. We've got more members. We're looking at different categories. I've kept on saying to people, look, if someone asks you if they can play bowls, don't just say, oh, yes, you've got to become a full member or a casual member or something. We want to accommodate them. So let's accommodate anyone who wants to play bowls. And that's been pretty much my philosophy, and it's permeated through the club. Yeah, so it has been good. And we're ideally situated. We've got a lot of walk-by traffic and drive-by traffic. So just last week, on the weekend, the place was full with a Kapiti Coast Council meeting. I'm having a launch of my book on the 9th of August there. There'll be a few people there. So the facilities have been developed and are being used more. So yeah, it's really good. Part of the community is important too, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's as you say, I don't think there's anyone in the country who hasn't heard of the Raumati Bowling Club, and I don't see that changing going forward. And they haven't let you escape, have they? Because you're not the president anymore. But I'm sure you've got another role there at the moment, don't you?
Well, I quite like it. They asked me if I would, they stay on, and I'm eager to stay on and help. I don't just want to shut the door on things. So they said, how about we invigorate the club captain role, because we'd sort of dropped that and gave people various roles to do. And I said, oh, yeah, okay, but it means I'll be very busy still. And they said, well, you do the job description yourself. so I think we've got a meeting tomorrow night or Wednesday night. I'm not sure if I'll get to that, but I haven't done my job description. But certainly, I'll still be around and part of the deal at the Raumati Bowling Club.
Oh, that's good stuff. That's really cool. So we've talked sort of a very brief outline of the book. I don't want to do too many spoilers because I want people to be reading the book. Is there any anecdotes? What's some of your favourite anecdotes before we move on to the end of the chat that you enjoy sharing, just from, if you look back over what is a significant career, what are some anecdotes, just one or two that you could share with us?
Well, I suppose there are... It's the people I've worked with, really, that have made this, and those people that have contributed to the book. I mentioned the three people have played a big part in what I've done, and I, in turn, have played a big part in what they've achieved too. So there's lots of little stories about that, and I could go back to one when I wasn't even a broadcaster, but a story that was I was reminded of when I met up with a couple of South Canterbury rugby people who were up here for a Ramphilly Shield Challenge in Wellington a couple of weeks ago. So when I was in my youth and single, I had decided that I would go to Lancaster Park in Christchurch from Timaru on a bus and take up my recorder, and I would interview some of the South Canterbury players. I knew them all. I was playing rugby at the time. And then I would have that ready for the Monday morning program on 3ZC in Timaru. But I didn't realise the bus that I was going on was starting with a champagne breakfast at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning, and then we'd stop at a pub at Dunsandel for morning tea, and then we'd have lunch at ex-All Black Maury Dixon's pub. So by the time I got to Lancaster Park, to put it briefly, I was pretty well hammered. So not in a situation where I could do any interviews. So watching this game, which South Canterbury only were right in it and had a chance to win it. I think they lost 19-8 or something like that. At half time, which was only 5 minutes in those days, we were sitting at halfway, me and a friend of mine, and we looked at the South Canterbury mascot, which was stuck into the ground, and we just said, let's get that. So we raced out halfway, picked it up, ran across the halfway line at Lancaster Park. The South Canterbury team was kicking off. Their fullback, who was a neighbour of mine, said, for goodness sake, McBeth. I ran across there along the embankment. We were showered with all sorts of stuff from there, ran around the back of the goalpost, put the mascot back in the ground, ran up the grandstand and took our seats again. Not a security person in sight in those days. No one came down and said, I'm sorry, we've got to eject you from the stadium. Nothing. I thought, gosh, I look back on that now and think, how I would be most critical of any young people who did that now, Alex.
Oh, but it was put that line in.
Yeah, it was just a fun thing, way back, and to still be reminded of that. That was 1970. So that's the people are still reminding me of that now. But in more modern days, lots of stories. But the people I've worked with, the people I've met, the people who I commentated on, who still talk to me, is quite important. That I didn't burn too many bridges. In fact, I'm meeting up tomorrow on Wednesday with Kim Robertson, who was a New Zealand athlete who was meant to go to the 1980 Olympic Games. And, 98 people were selected. There was a boycott. More than half of those athletes never went to an Olympic Games. Some went the previous Games, and some went in the next Games. But some, like Kim, never got there. And she would have been, I think, a finalist in her 400 metres. She still holds the New Zealand track record for that. Lives in the States now. And I met up with a whole lot of those during a 20-year reunion or 30-year reunion of that team who haven't been recognised as being an Olympic team because they never competed. So, there's quite a few. There's a few stories in the book too, which might get people just choking up a wee bit. Personal stuff, Alex, and but mainly it's good, happy, a bit of bitching in there. Well, it's my story.
It's your book. You can write whatever you want. That's fair enough too. And I know the name of your book is called It's Over, but it's not over, John. So before we ask how we can get hold of this book, have you got any plans for what's the next chapter in your book? What's coming up?
I was quite delighted to delete all the stuff that I'd written and say, that's it. Will never happen again. However, the family, and this really started out, as I said, way back, but it was mainly for a family thing. That's when my son interviewed me. That was what we were going to do, a book on the family, for the family. And now my family are saying, you've got all that stuff on our family history in those folders in your office, John. Isn't it about time you started putting that together? So maybe that's the next one, Alex, but that will definitely be just for family.
Oh, fair enough too. And then this book, how do we get it? How do people get this book if they like what they've heard and want to read some more? What's the best way to get hold of this book?
Well, I've been very pleasantly surprised that people are interested in it. I just printed a few off ready for some mates and maybe anyone who wanted to purchase one. But so I've set up an email address, Alex. It's McBeth Tartan. It's McBethTartan, McBeth Tartan 23 @gmail.com. So if you're interested, and I'd love to hear from you, you can email me on that. I'll respond personally, and I'll give you the details of how to get one. I'm sitting here with a half a dozen ready in bags all ready to go out to people who've felt confident enough to give me an email and think they might enjoy it. So I'd like to hear from you, and that's how you can do it.
That's brilliant. And no one is allowed to send you an email back saying, "Oh, we found a mistake on page 37," or
You've seen that one, have you? No, I'm pleased for any reaction. It's really good. I'm absolutely delighted and surprised that I've managed to do this. Lots of people have said to me, I've often thought about writing a book, but I wouldn't know where to start. And I say to them, I had no idea where to start. But for goodness sake, start, because you never know what will be the end product.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, John. It's been good talking to you today on this podcast, and we're sure to hear your dulcet tones on the airwaves and the years and months to come. But a great chat about that book. I'll have to acquire a copy and see if I can weave into any commentary that we have going forward. I'll just remind you of a couple of
yes, you can. And just hope that I remember them.
I just agree.
Yeah,
but no, thank you very much for joining me, John, on this episode of Beyond the Bias. We try to bring one of these out monthly, so if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast with John McBeth, keep an eye peeled for something coming up next month, which will be, is it July? The month of August, we'll have another podcast with another personality from the bowls world. But that's it from me and from John for today's episode, and we'll see you again next month.